Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict. I'm a futurist and partner here at TCS, and I want to welcome each of you to the program today. Today, you guys are in for a treat. Our guest today is futurist, keynote speaker, and author Byron Reese. Byron is an Austin, Texas-based serial entrepreneur and technologist who holds several technology patents and has started and sold multiple companies, including 2 NASDAQ IPOs. He has a brand new book coming out in August called Stories, Dice, and Rocks That Think: How Humans Learned to See the Future and Shape It. Now, you can see why I'm excited about this. As a futurist, this book is like written for me. So Byron, thanks for joining us today.
I am so glad to be here.
So you're in Austin. What's going on in Austin nowadays?
It's usually hot. It's a great place to live if you're a baked potato.
So let's talk about the pandemic and your role as a futurist. It seems like, because I watched a bunch of your videos, I've now read halfway through your latest book, and you have 4 other books we'll talk about here in just a moment. But it looks like you travel around a lot as your normal routine. How did the pandemic alter that?
Oh, it stopped it. My wife and I have 4 kids that we homeschool. Some of them are now into college and some aren't. So travel was always a big thing. And since I write, I could do that from anywhere. And so I missed it. But no, we hold up in our home, and I got a lot of writing done.
So let's talk about those other books that you've written. So you've written books that cover a wide spectrum of topics around emerging trends and technologies and all that stuff. You have Infinite Progress, The Fourth Age, Wasted, and now your new book here, The Stories, Dice, and Rocks That Think. So in a sentence, give us a little background on each of those books. What topics did you cover?
Infinite Progress is a defense of techno-optimism.
I like that. I like to bill myself as an optimistic futurist. So
I'm not like married to optimism. I'm not going to be like, no matter what. I read a quote from Gene Roddenberry, who said that in the future, there will be no hunger and there will be no greed, and all the children will know how to read. And I heard that, and I wondered if it was true or if it just rhymed and sounded true. So I wrote that whole book to answer that question.
Fascinating. If you want to know more, grab that Infinite Progress. So The Fourth Age.
It's a philosophy book about artificial intelligence. My publisher asked me not to call it that. Philosophy books are not known for flying off the shelf, but it wonders why all these people have such different ideas about AI. Like, is it going to take all the jobs, or is it going to empower people? Is it going to take over the world? Is it impossible? All of that. And what I figured out is that it isn't that the people who believe different things, that they know stuff that other people don't know. It's that they have beliefs about what people are really. Are people machines? That's where you start that conversation. Because until you figure out what people are, you can't really discuss whether a machine can duplicate what a person does. It depends. Well, what's a person? What's different about a person? Yeah. Then a book came along called Wasted. Wasted is just a general science book about the nature of waste. So it's 30 or so chapters. Each one covers a different topic. And it's just because I got very interested in the topic and decided I would write about it. And then this one, Stories, Dice, and Rocks That Think. It's really about how are people different than animals? And what it asks is, it says, look, you can say we're just another animal or whatever you want. But common sense tells you that when you look around, our lives are very different than the animals, right? Like, you can talk about how smart dolphins are all you want. They don't actually change as the eons pass. And I got really interested in that. If we're only different in matters of degree, why is our outcome as a species so different? I'm writing another book right now, which asks if we are all part of superorganism, which I call Agora. You see, none of your cells know you're there. Your cells don't know who you are. They just live their life oblivious to your existence. And you wonder, is it possible that people are like that? I mean, look, any crackpot idea could be true. That's not the question. The question is there actually evidence to suggest there's a superorganism made up of humans and that we actually are a single entity?
Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
Okay, so you heard it here. These books are covering a huge area, and we're going to peel back some of the cover on the newest book here. So your book, this new one, has more deep thoughts, insights, revelations than any business strategy or technology book that I have read in the last 5 years. It's a page turner. So I'm a big fan. And I've literally covered my copy in digital notes and stars and check boxes and everything else, because I want to come back to some of those ideas. And I'm not getting through it very quickly because of that. I'm pondering like every page of it here. So it's not something I'm going to get through quick, because there's a lot of bold ideas, which is that other thing that I really appreciate about your writing. So was there an exact moment when you realized that book needed to be written?
I would say so. I watched a documentary from Werner Herzog on a cave in France called Chauvet. And in this cave, which I had heard of, but I didn't know like the documentary worth of it.
Yeah.
There are these paintings that are just beautiful. Not like, wow, those are beautiful to be so old. They're just beautiful. And then to discover those are the oldest cave paintings. We don't think they're the oldest anymore, but they're among the oldest. And so somehow they're perfect. They're beautiful. They're amazing. And I wondered, like, I would have thought the earliest cave art would have been like stick figures.
Yeah.
And then maybe stick figures with like, I don't know, a spear. But it isn't like that at all. It began and it was beautiful. I mean, just beautiful. And so that got me reading about like, well, how did that happen? What happened? And then maybe the idea that actually something transformed us. And that took me into what different authors call maybe the Great Leap Forward, or, what changed. A radioactive spider bit us evidently and gave us all these powers that we have. And it looks like it didn't happen gradually. It looks like it happened maybe to one person on one afternoon at 3 p.m. And so I started writing about that. And then I don't really start saying, I shall write a book about X. I just start writing stuff. And then they're like chapters, and then I throw stuff out. I've got much more that's never seen the light of day and never will. I wrote stuff and it just didn't go anywhere. That one, just the topic I've been fascinated with for so long that I got into that. And then, of course, that led me. Well, anyway, that's the short answer. Yes.
Okay. So there was a documentary set off your brain. It ended up in a fantastic book. That's brilliant. So let's read a quote from Stories, Dice, and Rocks That Think. Here's the quote. We are endowed with a temporal mental plasticity that enables our minds to roam freely through time, untethered from the here and now. Our thoughts flow effortlessly from the present to the future. Tell us the significance of that human development.
There are those who would disagree with it, that's unique to us. And so looking at the other thing, animals don't know there's a future or a past. They don't have what's known as episodic memory. Now, that's a controversial statement. It's not unwarranted or unprecedented. There are just people who would take issue with it. But even if you believe animals do have some knowledge or some appreciation of the future, maybe it's a few hours, maybe. Like, I ain't no dolphin that's going to buy a 401k or anything like that, right? Like, so, and then I thought, we're very different. Like, we hardly ever are in the moment. And because we're constantly planning, like moment by moment by moment, we're trying to anticipate what's about to happen next, from merging into traffic to everything. We live our lives and we call upon specific events in the past. Your dog, when it learns to sit, doesn't remember all the times you told it to sit. It learns how to sit upon command, but doesn't remember, I remember it was last Thursday I was told to sit. And like, I know it's a hard thing to imagine, not being able to think about the future and the past, but that really is. And so the minute you can think about the future and use the past to shape it, you become a very different kind of creature, right? You can look at things and say, well, I could go up the back of that mountain, but there's a cave up there, and that cave sometimes has a saber-toothed tiger in it. Or I could climb up the side, like you start thinking about the future in a way that animals don't. And that's the mental plasticity, where we don't have to, it's not hard for us to think about the future and the past. I can contemplate my old age. I can remember stuff from my childhood, and I don't give it any thought at all. You see, last thing I'll say on that, the future and the past don't exist. They're like fictions. They're not real things. It is not surprising necessarily that animals don't understand these kind of abstract concepts the way we do. But we understand these things that don't exist. And that is the key, one of the three keys, stories, dice, and rocks that think, that are how we predict the future.
Wow. I'm listening to you there, and I'm thinking about these geese that mate for life. I could just see one, looking at the other and saying, I know we're married, but who are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's brilliant. So let's take that a little further then. So here's another quote. This knowledge of ours comes at a price, for it reveals our mortality. So how does that knowledge change us as humans?
Well, knowing there's a future means there's a future you're not going to be in. Like, you're going to die. And dogs don't sit around contemplating like, today is a good day, but someday I shall no longer be here. I mean, it's just not. So that's the cost. That's what we pay to understand the future. So I write in there that all animals are immortal because they don't know they're going to die. It's not my quote. Wow. It was by, I cite him in the book.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fantastic thought. But I mean, there's a burden to knowing you're mortal. There's worry and stress. There's probably missed expectations. You wished this was your life or that was your future, but instead of A or B, you're going to open up door C or door 4, all these kinds of things. So there's a burden with that, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So early in your book, you wrote, we were story thinkers before we became storytellers. So for our audience today, why is that concept so important to the thesis of your book?
I like to make up words, by the way. I think Shakespeare would just make up like 3 before breakfast every morning. Yes. You just make up words. And I'm not going to let some spell checker be the boss of me. It can underline whatever it wants with red squiggles, but I'm going to put story thinker in there as a word.
Yeah.
So it really boils down to language. If I were to ask you what seems like the most obvious question in the world, what's the purpose of language? Most people would say the purpose of language is communication. I don't think that's true. I mean, we use it for communication, but that would be like saying the purpose of your smartphone is to play Pokemon Go. Like, it's not why they were invented. Like, maybe that's what you do all the time, but you communicate with other people, but that isn't why they came about. And language is the same way. The purpose of language, how we think in language. There's a fascinating quote from Helen Keller where she talks about her life before her teacher came. And she said that before her teacher came, she did not know she was an entity. She did not know she was something different than the universe. And then she learned she was something, and she understood time, and she learned there were other things. Like, unless you have language, you can't make that ordered sense of the world. And humans are the only ones with language. Again, I know it's a controversial statement, and I write chapters about it in the book where I try to air many alternate viewpoints, because, there are a lot of these things that we don't know, right? Like, I write a book that has my best intuition, guess, and belief, and all of that, and I try to cite where people disagree with me, and I try to cite them by name, because I'm not proselytizing. I'm not trying to convince people of what I think. I do think animals don't have speech, and again, I write about it extensively. They don't have like what we have. So all of it to say is, you have to, I think, somebody way back when got speech as a mental construct. And with that, they could think. And when they could think, that's when they were able to imagine these stories. And the immediate stories were alternate things that could happen in the next few minutes. I could climb the tree to get the thing, but there could be giant spiders, or I could shake the tree.
Yes.
I don't know. And so we would think in stories, I think generations before we could tell them, because there was only one person who could do it. I think there was somebody who, there's a few choices, but there could have been just one person who could do it. And then that is such a survival benefit that their tribe of 120 people or whatever would have done well, and those genes would have spread and then spread from there. So I think we would think in stories, and then eventually 100 years later, 200 years later, we might tell them, you know, we could go up this mountain, or we could do this.
You can organize your thoughts, organize plans, start planning for the future, articulate those ideas and the alternatives and the risk. And I love that idea. So as a futurist myself, I found the following paragraph really powerful. We, meaning humans, were able to draw upon the past to imagine multiple futures and predict which of them would happen. This gave us mastery of the planet in an evolutionary blink of an eye. With it, we invented agriculture, created cities, devised writing systems, divided into nations, and explored the world. So what happened that made our imagination suddenly so powerful? And it goes back to the speech, right?
There was something happened. I mean, what's fascinating about it, and I'll return to the cave in Chauvet, 30,000-year-old beautiful paintings, right? And they used, for black, they used something called haussmannite, a mineral, a black mineral, that to make their black, they had to heat it 1600 degrees, which isn't easy to do with campfire. And the closest source they had for that mineral was 130 miles away. Now, think about that. They had black, they had charcoal in abundance, but it wasn't black enough. Like, they wanted black. And so, and, you know, they would build scaffolding too, because these things are way up, and they would prepare and so that happened. And then the same exact time, we find the first musical instruments. We find flutes could play modern music written by both Chopin and Taylor Swift, two names you seldom see together. We find figurative art for the first time, where we actually represented something else. This is a whatever. So imagine for a moment, you are frozen in time. You don't know there's a future. Like, you just react to the world around you. That's your world. And, you know, you just kind of do your thing, and you don't think about the future, because you don't even the idea of it we were like that. And then one day we weren't, and we could say, well, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. Which is more likely? I will draw up on the past for specific instances, and I will try to figure out which of these is more likely to happen. That's how the first section of the book ends, because the second section of the book picks up and says, you know, we did it kind of ad hoc. That's how we predict the future. Like, Og went up that mountain and he got eaten. Maybe I shouldn't go up the mountain, right? Like, what we decided to do was we decided to make a science for predicting the future. We call that science probability. And we didn't know anything about it until 1650. I mean, it's crazy how we didn't understand it. So we spent 50,000 years, I think, being able to see the future and predict it, but not systematically. We didn't have a method for predicting the future. We just were like, oh, well, you know, we didn't have statistical analysis or anything like that. And that's the whole second part of the book. How did we invent probability? That sounds like chloroform in print. It really does. I get that, but it isn't. I mean, even if you're not a math person, we had to rethink how we understood reality. And then that's the second part. And then the third part of the book are the rocks that think, which is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for computer chips, silicon chips.
Got it. So you hold on to that thought here, because I want to give the quote that comes from that part of the book. All commerce was based on probability theory, on using probability to predict everything from inventory levels to consumer demand. virtually all of the modern world, this goes back to your bold statements, virtually all of the modern world in all its complexity sits atop the science of seeing the future. Mm-hmm. Now, mathematicians everywhere are going to bow down and honor you for saying that.
Oh, well, it's very kind of them. I accept checks, money orders, and
so again, walk us through that idea that the world is laid on a foundation of probability theory.
Before, say, 1650, we had a post-Renaissance world. We had some of the Enlightenment. We started looking at the heavens and figuring out we could predict things and mathematically, and we had these simple laws. And so people started looking and saying, well, maybe there's similar laws that apply to people. That didn't work out so well, by the way. Sociology has resisted attempts to reduce it to equations, but it was a reasonable idea. If Newton could come up with 3 that describe the heavens, maybe we could. But then other people are relating to money. It all started actually with life insurance. I'll tell the life insurance story real quickly. Up until relatively recently, there was a widespread belief that your odds of dying at any point in time were the same, no matter what your age was. So an 80-year-old person and a 20-year-old person had the same chance of dying in the next year. Now, on the one hand, it's very forgivable because if you live in a world where untimely death is common, it may at a gut level seem like a 60-year-old person could get kicked by a mule and a 40-year-old person get kicked by a mule, and it could happen to either of them. It's not that unreasonable of an assumption. We know, because we're kind of raised in this world, this actuarial world, where we know that the older you get, the more likely you are to die. By the time you're 65, 66, you have a 1% chance of dying every year. Sometimes people think of that as the breaking point between old age when you have a 1% chance of dying, but they didn't. So they would sell life insurance policies kind of the same price, no matter what age you were. And then, old people would buy them and young people wouldn't, and then they would lose their shirts. And so along came people who said, well, maybe we can figure this out with numbers. So they started walking around cemeteries and just writing down how old people were when they died. And lo and behold, it does vary. And so this guy came along and he made the first actuarial tables. And then they said, well, maybe we can price life insurance based on your age. And so they did that. But now all of a sudden, you're saying something very different about death, because death, capital D, like, carrying the scythe, death must have seemed very capricious. Like it could happen to the 80-year-old person or the 20-year-old person or the 40-year-old. Who knows? All of a sudden now death became mathematical. Like you have a 1.8% chance of dying this year. And we've looked at thousands of people your age, and that's what we think. And so now all of a sudden we were predicting the future. And, so then all of a sudden they were selling annuities to raise money for war. And then people started doing expeditions to try to, raise, try to get fortune in the new world. And what are the odds that it's going to return? And how much will it pay if it does? And what should I charge? And so all of a sudden with commerce, there used to be no profit in math. Like, I think the ancient Greeks who mastered geometry and whatnot, it was like a philosophy thing. It wasn't practical and applied. The ancient Egyptians used math to help with land and borders, but nobody really used it much. And then all of a sudden, the financial world happens, and it became something we could predict with numbers. And so that's why I think the insurance industry, the investment, everything I think is based on, well, what's likely to happen tomorrow and how likely is it to happen?
And another thing that you said in your book is you suggest in your book that our drive for innovation, new technologies, is and was largely driven by a desire to see the future better, to your point. Did I understand that point right? Is that what you're saying?
I don't remember that particular part, but I wouldn't particularly argue against it. I mean, really, that is.
So, computers are so you can see the future better and you can calculate numbers better and you can that, right?
Okay. Let me actually dive in on that briefly. Why do things happen the way they do? Like, why does the future unfold a certain way? There were 3 or 4 theories of this. One is, that everything that happens is destined to happen. That it was that the fates were written out when you were born, and that was it. It would be kind of like if you sit down tomorrow to play chess with the greatest chess player in the world, you're going to lose. You can still make any move you want, but you're going to lose. Like, that's it. It's written, even though it isn't. Or then there was another view on why things happen the way they did. And that view was known as necessity. And we've all had a version of this. Like, I stubbed my toe this morning. Was that the inevitable chain of a series of events that began at the Big Bang, culminating with me stubbing my toe? I stubbed my toe because I woke up, and I could only wake up at that time because of the chemicals in my brain and those chemical, like, it was all just inevitable. Everything that happens is inevitable. Like, it could happen no other way. It's a mechanistic clockwork view of the universe, and Enlightenment thinkers loved it for a number of reasons. I digress. One that was not on anybody's radar is that things happen randomly. And just happens randomly. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And then you say, well, that's frightening. If the future is this giant, anything could happen. Like, what do we do with that? Well, we learned something really cool, which is that there's high predictability and uncertainty and randomness. I brought something for show and tell today. Okay. It's called a Galton board. You've probably seen one of these in a science museum, but the basic idea is there's this reservoir of little beads. There's 1,000 of them.
Okay.
And when I flip it up, the beads are going to start falling, and they're going to hit a piece of plastic.
Yeah.
And they can decide whether they're going to go to the left or the right, and then they can decide if they're going to go from the left and the right. And when you do that, lo and behold, you get a normal curve. Look at that. Now, how did that happen? Because every one of those beads is falling randomly, and yet that's the same curve. Boy, if you ever do this,
yeah,
and you get a big U, zoop, go buy a stock or a lottery ticket or something, because the universe does not work that way. Look at that. I can flip this thing all day long, and yet it's going to keep making the normal curve. Yeah. Even though every one of those little things is blah, 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 blah. And that was what we didn't know, that you do enough, you flip enough coins, and it isn't random anymore. It's highly certain. And that was the basis we built probability on. But that's not an obvious thing. If you had asked me, hey, Byron, flip a coin 1,000 times.
Yeah.
How many times are you likely to get heads? I honestly would have said, well, I don't know. I mean, it could be 300, 500, 700, who knows? The odds that you're going to get more than 600 or less than 400 are 1 in billions, billions. So 1,000 coin tosses, the odds you're not going to get something between 400 and 600 is in the 1 in billions. And there's a high degree of certainty in that. And that is what we didn't know. And that is what we figured out in the 1650s. That allowed us to create probability theory. Here's a math problem that people circulated all over the place and is well known, but nobody could solve it. And I'm going to tell it to you. Let's say you and I are going to play a game, and we're going to flip a coin 5 times.
Yeah.
Every time a head comes up, you get a point.
Okay.
Every time a tail comes up, I get a point.
Yeah.
We have flipped the coin 3 times already, and you're winning 2-1. Okay?
Okay.
There's 2 more flips left. But the fire alarm goes off, and we have to run out of the building. What would be the fair way to split the pot, the money? So you're winning 2-1. There's 2 more tosses. So this problem circulated for a century. We have all kinds of writing about it. The first answer is no way to know. Who knows what those last 2 coins were going to do?
Yeah.
Who knows? So people said, okay, you can't solve it. Then other people said, well, you got twice as many points as me. Maybe you should get 2/3 of the money and I should get 1/3 of it. Seems reasonable. Other than if we were playing to 1 million and you were winning 2-1, we wouldn't say that, would we? We were playing to 1 million. You're up. You got 2 points. I've got 1. And you should get twice the pot. No. So there's a number of ways to solve it. One is you say, well, the next toss could be heads, in which case you would win, or tails. And then the final toss could be heads or tails, and you would win. But we're heads then. And so of the 4 possible outcomes of the future, only one of them has me winning and 3 have you winning. So really, you should get 3/4 of the pot and I should get 1/4. That's the solution that nobody could figure out until 1647, when one is Blaise Pascal's writing these letters to each other and they say, ha ha, I have solved it. And then once they solved it, the world went crazy. But to us, it is so simple. Like, it is trivially simple. But what you have to remember is they didn't think of the world like we did. They would never have understood. Like, if I were to ask them, what's going to happen when you flip this? It's like, who knows? But you can know.
Oh, man. Thanks for sharing those. Phenomenal. So here's another quote from your book. The belief was, and still is, that all that data combined with near unlimited processing power will give us the ability to see the future as accurately as we see the present. If we can do this, we will become true masters of fate. What I love about you as an author, again, is how bold you are with these statements. So although bold, you do add that disclaimer, if we can do this. Will we be able to do it, Byron?
The this that it's referring to is from section 3, The Rocks That Think. And what it says is, we learned about probability and we learned how to use it, and we learned how to think probabilistically. And that took us all the way to 1950 in a modern world. But at some point, the problems get bigger and they're just too hard for people. And so we invented the first transistor computer. And that was the hope, because we made these computers to do all this calculation for us. And then we learned we could attach sensors to them. And then they could gather data and perform calculations on them. The old promise that I mentioned a few minutes ago about causality and the idea that the universe is clockwork, that if you knew the position of every atom, its position, direction, and all of that, you could predict the future unerringly. And that's still more or less the hope. I don't think anybody thinks. We also know about chaos theory, which is when you get a few decimal places out, you can't really predict what little changes are going to do. And we find that's not true, actually. But we do hope that in principle, we can collect all the data about our lives. And think about that for a minute. I mean, when I say all the data, imagine if you were recording every word you ever said and every word you read and every conversation you had and all of that. Would I be able to tell you, oh, you should do this with high degrees of accuracy? Like right now, our only experience of that is, oh, the program said I should listen to that song and I loved it. Like, that's our taste of that. But what is the logical limit of that? And that's what that is proposing, is the hope is we live our lives on largely anecdotal evidence. Our descendants are going to look at us and they're going to think we like staggered through our lives like drunken sailors on shore leave, just capriciously making decisions like, I'll do that, and where will I go on vacation? I'll do that, like all of that. Now, the idea is that there's going to be this thing that tells you what you should do, and it's going to be right almost all the time. And so you're going to just start believing it. It would be, I liken it in the book, I would say, let's say you're going metal detecting on the beach and you've got your metal detector and you're doing your thing and it goes, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. You don't have to dig there. You can dig anywhere on that beach you want. It's your prerogative, but you're going to dig there, right? Because the system told you there's a doubloon there.
Yes.
And you dig it and you find a doubloon and you're like, I trust this thing. So imagine if that digital parrot is sitting on your shoulder telling you everything you should do, and it's usually right. Then the book asks, is that empowering to people, or does that reduce our humanity? What are we like then? And at my heart, I love technology, but at my heart, I love people more. I mean, I love humanity. I think always curious, like, are these technologies working to improve our human experience or detract it? I will say, last thing I'll say on this, which is the biggest thought in the book, as far as I'm concerned, for 3.5 billion years, the only place that we could write information was in our DNA. It's reliable, but man, it takes a long time to learn anything. And one day 50,000 years ago, somebody got language. And then all of a sudden I could tell you, don't eat the blueberries. They will make you sick.
Yes.
And that didn't take 100,000 years. That your DNA is no longer in your cells. It's in your head. The book then goes on to say that nobody knows how to make a smartphone. Not a terribly revolutionary thought. There was a famous essay called I, Pencil 70 years ago where it was pointed out, nobody knows how to make a pencil, right? Nobody knows how to mine the ore and refine it to metal and bend the ferrule and get the rubber. And well, think about this, your body has what, 30 elements in it. This has 60. This has 60 elements. Nobody knows how to make this. Collectively, all the written stuff that we've written down, that's now our DNA. That's the DNA of our society. And whatever that creature is, that's what knows how to make the smartphone. So if we lived all this time where we couldn't write anything, everything everybody used to know, they forgot. I mean, they die and it's forgotten. Then somebody else learns it. Don't eat the blueberry, and then they die and it's forgotten again and again and again. We're finally reaching this world where the life experiences of everybody are going to be saved in order to make the life experience of everybody else better. And to me, that is very affirming to our humanity.
So the book is Stories, Dice, and Rocks That Think: How Humans Learn to See the Future and Shape It, by Byron Reese. Byron, thanks for joining us today.
What a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.